Hello, Oana, and hello, Alfredori. Um, as I anticipate, excuse me, as I burp, very rude. As I anticipate that this will somehow pass through your inspection care before it reaches Oana. It's really, really nice to talk to you, Oana. I've missed you. I think a lot of people have. And I'm just hoping that you're happy. That's really all that matters. Oh yeah, I did do Choran for you a couple of days ago, didn't I? Oh well, my mental list is obviously not reliable because I had forgotten that. I am forgetting a lot of things at the moment. It's rather sad. It's rather annoying more than sad. Anyway, this isn't about me. But this is, I guess. I haven't decided yet. I think this is going to be in lieu of a Christmas present. I know I promised to buy you that villa in Saint-Tropez. That's fallen through. Some sort of problem with the conveyancing. I must have been using a dodgy and disreputable lawyer. Can't trust lawyers. So yeah, if I do not get round or cannot afford, either is equally likely at the moment. I was thinking about lawyers and liability. Bloody bastards. Yeah, you can have me reading. And I'm sure that you won't wish to open or even view this on the 25th, and I do not blame you in the slightest. Or you might want to, if you all get drunk at some wonderful festive family dinner, and decide to laugh at the stupid Englishman who has fallen under cherubic charm. Right. I am going to read, aren't I? Yes. And I am going to read something which may have come your way. Well, it did come your way, I know it did. A long time ago. Oh, yeah. Because it does matter, doesn't it? You know that better than anybody. And I will just try to enliven myself a little and to get some focus before I start. I love doing these, and here we are. Sorry, it is 5:15 a.m. here, which partly explains the state of dislocation that I am currently sitting in. It does not explain why I'm still sitting in the same bloody shirt as I was wearing God knows how many days ago. Yeah, I'll just do this. We can pretend that it's a nice, pristine, clean white top or something. Oh, my hair looks dreadful too, and I need a shave. Oh, God. Alright. I hope you've been getting something out of this this book. I see that she is primarily a translator of Spanish literature or Latin American literature. Yeah. Well, she's translated Don Quixote, which is pretty major. And Vargas Llosa, whom I remember reading at a very young age, 17, 16 even, his colossal book, The War of the End of the World. It was my first exposure to magic realist literature, and its impression is still seared onto my mind. What an amazing book. Some of the later books haven't been too great, but that one, wow. And a book by Garcia Marquez, Memories of My Melancholy Whores. Gosh. Well, I don't know about you, but I would certainly pick that title up if I saw it on a shelf in a bookshop. I haven't read it. I haven't read it at all. I might have to get it before Christmas. Yeah. Love in the Time of Cholera. Wow, that's wonderful. One of the 3 or 4 best books about love that I've ever read. Best novels about love that I've ever read. But I am not going to be self-indulgent. Well, I'm always self-indulgent, but so we are going to tackle poetry today, if you do not mind. So that's part 3 of this book, which is page 89. I'll just read as much as I can before I fall asleep or fall off this chair. You, of course, may fall asleep whenever you like, and I rather hope you do. Page 89. John Felstiner knows more than most about the translation of difficult verse. Not only has he translated the poetry of Pablo Neruda and Paul Celan, but he has written incisively and compellingly in 2 brilliant books, translating Neruda, The Way to Machu Picchu, and Paul Celan, Poet, Survivor, Jew, about the process of bringing the work of those poets over into English. Felstiner consistently affirms the intrinsic, independent significance of the successful poetic tradition. And you will have noticed, if you are reading along, that when I said tradition, I should have said translation. The successful poetic translation, God, I should have known that. It's a bloody book about translation, isn't it? Calling it a literary artifact as noteworthy and estimable as an original piece of writing. Yeah, fair enough. The attribution of extreme value to translation is a concept that has brought me extraordinary aid and comfort at those times when I have been engaged in the overwhelmingly difficult and exceptionally rewarding act of rendering Spanish language verse into English. I have always derived immense pleasure from the translation of poetry. My first forays into the work when I was a student at the University of Pennsylvania were well intended somewhat pious efforts to transform Spanish poems into English ones for the campus literary magazine. And yet, in spite of that youthful enthusiasm, the main focus of my activity in translation has been prose fiction. What I learned in the early days of my career may help to explain why I did not follow my poetic bliss. When I was starting out as a translator in the 1970s, the generally accepted rate in New York for the translation of poetry was 50 cents a line. This meant that if you devoted serious, sometimes excruciating amounts of effort, time, and emotional energy to the translation of a sonnet into English, your total fee was $7. No matter how abstemious your needs and wants, no matter how circumspect your financial ambitions, it was clearly impossible to earn even a modest living as a translator of poetry, unless you were willing to take an irrevocable vow of poverty. The rates for translating fiction were not much better, but most of the time it was possible to complete a page of prose in about the same time it took to revise and rework a line of poetry. It was, in other words, a more cost-effective enterprise. No wonder the siren song of prose grew louder, sweeter, and increasingly irresistible as I devoted more and more time to translating until it finally became my full-time occupation some 20 years later. But over the years I have been fascinated to discover that the translation of artful prose and the translation of poetry are comparable in several significant ways. They both presuppose in the original writing an exquisitely thoughtful use of language to create the many effects that the literary arts are capable of. Emotional resonance, conceptual engagement, rhythmic pattern, aesthetic tension, and sheer gorgeousness of expression. And they both present analogous challenges to the translator's literary sensibilities and our capacity for entering a text as deeply as possible. The specific experience of translating poetry, with its obligatory attentiveness to the most minute compositional details, linguistic nuance, rhythm, and sound in 2 languages, enhances immeasurably the approach to the translation of prose, an artistic idiom that has its own nuances, rhythms, and sounds, all of which need to be transferred, their aesthetic integrity intact, into a second language. In spite of these undeniable intergenre connections, I do not believe anyone could, or would even want to, dispute the notion that poetry is the most intense, highly charged, most artful and complex form of language we have. In many ways, it is the essential literary expression of our species, long associated with the distant origins of music, dance, and religious ritual in early human cultures. And yet, although it may be universally human, the inescapable truth is that poetry can sometimes seem completely localized, thoroughly contextualized, and absolutely inseparable from the language in which it is written in ways that prose is not. The textures of a language, its musicality, its own specific tradition of forms and meters and imagery, the intrinsic modalities and characteristic linguistic structures that make it possible to express certain concepts, emotions, and responses in a specific manner, but not in another. All of these inhere so profoundly in a poem that its translation into another language appears to be an act of rash bravado, verging on the foolhardy. Still, we who make that injudicious attempt are the heirs to a long tradition of verse translation. In the modern period, poets like Yves Bonfoy, I presume it's Bonnefoy, Ezra Pound, William Carlos Williams, Charles Baudelaire, Richard Howard, W.S. Merwin, Richard Wilbur, and Charles Simic, to name only a handful, have proclaimed the value of translating poetry by engaging in it themselves. And there is no doubt that by means of translation, poets have had a profound and long-lived influence on writing in other languages. Consider, for example, the comprehensive, defining impact of Petrarch on all of Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries, of Walt Whitman through Latin America in the 19th and 20th, of Federico Garcia Lorca and Pablo Neruda on poets in the United States after the Second World War. It is almost impossible to imagine what the course of Western poetry would have been without these and many similar cultural and linguistic convergences of poetic form and sensibility. Anne Sexton, for one, was fully aware of this, as cited in an essay by Jonathan Cohen. Quote, "We, i.e. North American poets," end quote, "are being influenced now by South American poets, Spanish poets, French poets. We are much more image-driven as a result. Neruda is the great image maker, the great colorist. That's why I say you have to start with Neruda." Well, maybe you have to start with Neruda, but I'm going to finish with him today. Not out of disrespect for him. I don't really know his work that well, but I do know he sits very high in the pantheon of respected poets of the recently past of recent times, I should have said. Sorry. It wasn't mentioned there. I thought for a minute it was going to be mentioned. But there's one definition of poetry, and I can't remember who said this at all. I'm sure I can find it on Google if I looked hard enough. When asked to give a definition of poetry, somebody replied, "Poetry is that which cannot be translated." And I know what that means, and I know what the poet or the person who said that is saying. I don't believe it. Or in a sense I do. I don't know. I'll leave you to think about that. You can have an answer. Do you want any more homework? I'm sure you don't. Poetry is that which cannot be translated. That's the definition of poetry. Yeah, oh God. I think very good arguments could be created both for and against that. I won't trouble you with rehearsing those arguments now, because I'm very sleepy indeed. Right, more coffee for me, and more, I don't know, Oana-ness for Oana. Right. Nothing else to report to you? No, don't think so. If I do not send you or Alfred or Dory anything further this year, happy Christmas to all three of you, and I'll be in touch with all of you in some way. Bye.